Hi, Sherry. You're surfing, are you, with a bag of chocolate? Hope you're good. Hope you're good. Hey, Phil. You alright, man? Oh, right. I need to get this out my system. So, bum bum. Let me just get rid of that now.
So, um, I want you to imagine just for a second, like the ultimate sci-fi workplace comedy.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. So picture a 30-day job hunt, but it's taking place aboard the first Death Star.
Oh man, that is that's a tough job market.
Yeah, totally. Only the applicant we're following here, he isn't some rebel spy trying to steal hands, and he isn't, a dark side Sith acolyte trying to climb the corporate ladder.
Right.
The guy handing out his resume is this incredibly eccentric, aggressively analog obsessed physicist, like a man who flat out refuses to believe that digital software even exists.
Which, I mean, it creates this immediate catastrophic friction. You're taking a man whose entire worldview is built on continuous physical phenomena,
Yeah.
and you're dropping him into a space station the size of a small moon that is entirely governed by discrete digital telemetry.
It's a disaster waiting to happen. So we are running a fast-paced, deadpan forensic audit today. Our producers basically handed us this massive stack of uploaded source files, physics papers, live transcripts.
A lot of transcripts, so many transcripts, and we're synthesizing all of it to evaluate our subject. We're going to call him Ken Wheeler.
Right.
And our mission for this deep dive is to basically contrast the subject's classical Neoplatonic physics vocabulary with the really unforgiving hyperdigital reality of the Galactic Empire's technocracy.
And, the thought experiment here is hugely compelling.
Yeah.
Because we are taking a real-world framework,
Yeah.
specifically the subject's exhaustive macrophysics worldview, and we're stress testing it against a fictional, highly engineered environment.
Yeah, exactly.
And while the scenario on the surface is pure satire, the implications of this clash, they are actually staggering.
They really are. See, I initially looked at this outline and thought, oh, okay, it's a funny internet joke about a guy yelling at a space station.
Sure.
But reading through these transcripts, I realized this is actually a really profound exploration for you, the listener. Because at its core, this is a story about what happens when you have absolute mastery of physical reality, like the hardware of the universe.
Right, the hardware. But you possess this total stubborn blindness to the hidden code governing that reality. The firmware, so to speak.
Yeah, the division between hardware and firmware, that's the crucial metric here. I mean, you can map every...
Do you remember what she said, Manny? It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Every single day, it's gonna get less and less until all of a sudden the picture becomes clear. And then it's about finding that balance.
Single inch of a physical system. You can know exactly how the gears turn, how the magnets repel, how the voltage flows. But if you deny the existence of the firmware,
like the actual program.
Exactly, the programmable logic dictating when and why those gears turn. If you deny that, you surrender your agency. You become nothing but a passive asset. You're completely at the mercy of the system when it decides to reboot.
Right. So before we throw our subject onto the Imperial command deck for his job interviews, we kind of have to build a profile of his operating system.
Right.
Or, well, his absolute rejection of an operating system.
Right, his lack thereof.
Yeah, because to understand why he fails so spectacularly on Death Star, we have to understand what he actually believes.
We definitely have to establish his baseline. And, the subject is not ignorant.
No, not at all.
He actually possesses an undeniable, genuinely impressive mastery of macrophysics. When we talk about continuous physical phenomena, he's operating at a savant level.
Yeah, the files are clear on that.
We are looking at a deep, intuitive comprehension of dielectricity, hypertoroids, classical field theory, and he has this foundational reverence for the historical works of guys like Charles Proteus Steinmetz, Nikola Tesla, Oliver Heaviside.
Well, let me stop
I
you right
agree.
there because I don't want us to lose anyone.
Sure.
When you throw out dielectricity and classical field theory, it sounds like standard engineering.
Yeah.
But his interpretation is highly specific, isn't it? He's not just some guy who likes old electrical textbooks.
No, the distinction is vital. So, classical field theory, particularly in the vein of those early 20th century pioneers like Steinmetz or Tesla, it often visualized electricity and magnetism not as discrete jumping particles,
Okay.
but as continuous flows of stress in a medium.
Like a fluid.
Right. And the subject takes this to its absolute philosophical extreme. He maps raw physical mechanisms and their geometry flawlessly. He understands dielectric compression, which is essentially the way electrical energy is stored as stress in an insulating material. He understands magnetic precession, the wobbling motion of magnetic fields.
And he one. But how does a physicist apply to magnets?
Well, by viewing the entire universe as a singular substance. In his Neoplatonic physics model, there are no empty spaces, and there are absolutely fundamental individual particles.
The no atoms.
Right, no atoms. There is only an uncreated gravity, magnetism, matter. They're just different states of etheric tension. And this brings us to a concept he relies on heavily, which is the golden ratio harmonic
Hi,
convergence.
Dolly.
Denoted by the Greek letter phi.
Exactly, phi. He believes the geometry of these etheric tensions always naturally resolve to perfect continuous harmonic ratios.
Which, I mean, that sounds beautiful, honestly. It's a very elegant, unified way to look at the universe.
It is.
Hopefully
But the
this should
source
make you
files
laugh.
flag this as his fatal flaw. They literally call it the passive analog ceiling. So if he has this beautiful unified theory of everything, how is it a ceiling?
The ceiling exists because his model is strictly continuous and strictly natural. Because he is so cognitively locked into this uncreated analog fluid medium, he vehemently rejects any concept that breaks reality into discrete chunks.
Oh, I see.
The moment you introduce discrete data processing, simulation mechanics, or digital firmware, his framework collapses entirely.
It's a hard limit in his brain. Like, he just can't go there.
It is absolute cognitive rejection. If reality is a natural, uncreated continuum, it cannot be an engineered, programmed construct. He simply cannot accept that there might be a software layer running beneath the physical mechanics, dictating the rules of the ether.
Wow. And the audit files, they contain this live transcript incident that I think illustrates this
Oh,
perfectly.
stream transcript.
Yeah, an auditor is in the subject's live stream and they drop a concept into the chat. They state that field induction is equivalent to quantum state propagation. I'll admit my eyes totally glazed over reading that phrase.
It's dense.
Yeah. So what is quantum state propagation and why does it break his brain so badly?
So, to understand quantum state propagation, think of a digital computer.
Okay.
A computer operates on discrete states, ones and zeros. It
Hey, Ken,
propagates
you all right?
or moves information by distinctly changing a memory state from a 0 to 1.
Right.
In modern quantum theory, and especially in simulation theory frameworks, reality is viewed similarly. Energy doesn't just flow like a continuous river, it transfers in discrete, viable packets.
Quanta.
Exactly, quanta. State propagation implies that the universe is actively calculating and updating reality frame by frame, like software rendering a video game.
Okay, so the auditor is basically saying, hey, that magnetic field you're looking at isn't a continuous fluid, it's the universe actively computing and updating discrete points.
Precisely. And that is precisely the kind of statement that triggers the subject's defense mechanism.
Oh boy.
In the transcript, we see him execute this highly predictable 3-step script to deflect the concept.
What's step one?
First, he performs a lexical demotion. He takes the phrase quantum state propagation and strips it of all its information theoretic meaning. He translates it down into his safe analog vocabulary.
Right, he calls it a mere ether perturbation modality.
Exactly. He neuters the concept. Second, he reduces the of the action. State propagation implies an active, intentional induction of a new state. The subject frames it instead as a passive release of energy. He turns an active computation into a passive natural occurrence.
He just changes the word so he doesn't have to deal with the math.
Yeah. And then comes the third step, which is just absolute structural denial. He looks at the camera, and I'm quoting exactly from the transcript here. He says, "Quantum state propagation doesn't exist."
Just flat out doesn't exist.
He draws a definitive boundary. By declaring it non-existent, he explicitly denies the existence of underlying simulation firmware. He denies discrete memory states. He denies state persistence.
And the source documents label this the processing gap. Whenever he is confronted with computational code or state saves, he just suffers massive cognitive dissonance and flattens it all back down to ether perturbations.
It's his safety blanket.
It makes me think of a brilliant 19th century clockmaker trying to repair a modern smartphone.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Give this clockmaker his pliers, and he can bend the lithium-ion battery. He can manipulate the casing. He can expertly analyze the physical materials, the hardware.
Sure.
But he is completely, hopelessly blind to the iOS running on the device. He literally lacks the vocabulary to comprehend software. If the screen goes black because of the software crash, the clockmaker will spend 10 years trying to fix the, glass perturbation.
The smartphone analogy perfectly captures his predicament. And the ultimate consequence of this blindness is that the subject traps himself in what the framework calls the passive observer fallacy.
Okay, walk me through that. What makes an observer passive versus active?
So, in a digital or engineered construct, an observer is not merely watching the universe happen. They can be an active transceiver.
An active transceiver.
Consider a highly specialized antenna cut to a precise harmonic ratio. That antenna does not simply let radio waves wash over it passively. Its very presence in geometry actively alter the localized field impedance.
It grabs the signal.
Yes, it grabs the signal. It converts raw wave energy into a discrete state shift, turning a wave.
So I don't know if you all heard that. There's a little bit of secret in there. I'll go back a little bit. It says something about an antenna being cut to a certain length. Pay attention to what that length is, and then ask yourself, what else is that length?
Geometry actively alter the localized field impedance.
It grabs the signal.
Yes, it grabs not simply.
He literally lacks the vocabulary to comprehend software. If the screen goes black because of the software crash, the clockmaker will spend 10 years trying to fix the, glass perturbation.
The smartphone analogy perfectly captures his predicament. And the ultimate consequence of this blindness is that the subject traps himself in what the framework calls the passive observer fallacy.
Okay, walk me through that. What makes an observer passive versus active?
So, in a digital or engineered construct, an observer is not merely watching the universe happen. They can be an active transceiver.
An active transceiver.
Consider a highly specialized antenna cut to a precise harmonic ratio. That antenna does not simply let radio waves wash over it passively. Its very presence in geometry actively alter the localized field impedance.
It grabs the signal.
Yes, it grabs the signal. It converts raw wave energy into a discrete state shift, turning a wave into actionable data. That is intentionality. That involves signal encoding. In the framework of reality, an active observer can actually influence the code of the system.
It can write to the hard drive, essentially.
Precisely.
But our subject rejects that entirely. He doesn't think human consciousness has any agency to change reality.
No, in his Neoplatonic view, true power and cause belong entirely to the unmanifest counterspace, which is the invisible source of the ether.
Okay.
The human biological form, our brains, our consciousness, these are just downstream byproducts. He categorizes human consciousness as a helpless, passive, phenomenal imprint,
Which he denotes as phi again.
often denoted by phi, yes. To him, we are just shadows radiating from counterspace. We have zero localized agency.
He believes the field dictates the form, and the form cannot dictate the field. A shadow can't move the object casting it.
Exactly the logic he employs.
But hold on. If he truly believes human consciousness is just a helpless, passive imprint, that's incredibly bleak. He has zero ability to write to the code of reality. He's just sitting on the beach, watching the analog waves crash, completely unaware that someone is operating a Waze machine.
It is a philosophy of supreme surrender masked as supreme mastery. He commands the physical geometry, but he surrenders all system agency.
Man. So we have a guy who is a master of physical fields, but is structurally, psychologically, and philosophically blind to software. How does this massive blind spot actually play out when he is convinced of a highly engineered, aggressively digital environment?
Ah,
It's time to take him to the Death Star.
this is the moment the theoretical collides with bureaucratic reality. The subject, seeking employment, attempts to secure a dry job on the Imperial Command Deck. He sits for the standard Imperial Fleet Operator assessment.
Which is arguably the most hostile environment possible for him. I mean,
So, I don't know if any of you here have heard this yet, but now we know what Ken and how he views his reality. So we're putting him with his reality in a simulated reality, and we're going to see how well his reality ends up.
Empire doesn't run on analog ether. The Death Star runs on standardized, discrete data packets. It requires processing buffers, precise digital firmware, heavily logged telemetry.
And the assessment is entirely digital. Therefore, the subject catastrophically fails every single software protocol and state processing module on the exam. He cannot even conceptualize the interface he is supposed to use.
And he doesn't just quietly fail either.
No.
According to the audit timeline, he throws a massive tantrum at the testing terminal. He rips a digital datapad out of the console, marches over to a turbo lift, and just throws the datapad down the shaft, loudly declaring to the Imperial testing proctors that it's a fake mathematical abstraction.
It is the cognitive dissonance manifesting physically. He cannot process the digital interface, so his defense mechanism is to physically destroy it and deny its reality.
Right.
However, tossing the datapad is only the preamble. The true inciting incident of this exam, the moment that permanently and fundamentally disqualifies him from the command deck, it revolves around a system update, a timeline patch.
The Mandela patch. I was reading this section of the source file last night, and I was dying laughing.
It's quite something.
Okay, we need to set this up properly. What exactly is a timeline patch in this context?
In simulation theory, a timeline patch occurs when the underlying firmware of reality is updated, retroactively changing a baseline detail of the construct.
Like the Mandela effect.
Exactly. The popular real-world analog is the Mandela effect, where large groups of people remember a detail from the past differently than how it currently exists in recorded history.
Like the Berenstain Bears.
Yes, remembering a children's book series as the Berenstain Bears instead of the current reality's Berenstain Bears. In this framework, that isn't faulty human memory. It is a clumsy firmware update that failed to wipe the old data from localized biological storage.
Got it. So during the exam, the subject is shown a sector maintenance log. And on this log, the system's operational baseline has shifted. In all previous timelines and documentation, the waste disposal units on the detention level were universally known as trash compactors.
Correct.
But the Imperial firmware has executed a rendering patch. Now, the official baseline terminology across the entire station is garbage masher.
And the exam is designed to test localized awareness. The proctors play an audio log for the subject. It's the famous intercepted transmission of Luke Skywalker shouting into his comlink.
Shut down all the garbage mashers on the detention level.
Exactly.
Now, if I am a standard employee, or even better, what the source text calls an errant node,
A sovereign auditor.
right, a sovereign auditor who understands how reality works, how am I supposed to react to that audio clip?
A sovereign auditor would hear that audio clip and instantly recognize the lexical shift. They would note the discrepancy between their internal memory of track compactor and the new audio of garbage masher.
Okay.
They would log the timeline drift, recognize that a firmware update just occurred, and mentally anchor their original baseline to maintain their own state persistence. They see the code changing around them, but they refuse to let the new code overwrite their sovereign memory.
They realize the matrix just glitched and they log it.
Yes.
But the subject is sitting at this terminal. He hears Luke Skywalker yell garbage masher. What happens in his brain?
Complete systemic failure. The subject is trapped under his passive analog ceiling. To acknowledge that a firmware rendering patch just occurred is to acknowledge that his continuous uncreated ether model is flawed.
Because if reality could be patched, reality is digital.
Exactly. He cannot cross that bridge.
So he completely loses his mind. The transcript says he starts screaming at the Imperial proctors.
Yeah.
He tells them that a garbage masher is a Neoplatonic physical impossibility.
Yeah.
He insists the trash compactor is the only true baseline and accuses quantum theorists of inventing the new term just to mess with him.
He utterly refuses to log the timeline drift. He treats a systemic rendering patch, a literal update to the fabric of his reality, as a personal attack on classical field geometry.
I want to pause here and just relate this to you, the listener, because while the space station setting is absurd, the psychology here is so profoundly human.
Oh, very much so.
Think about it. Have you ever been in a situation, maybe at a job or in a long-term relationship, where the fundamental rules of the dynamic shifted, like the code changed?
Yeah.
And rather than stepping back, recognizing the systemic shift, and adapting to the new reality, you just kept pounding your fists on the table, arguing about the semantics of the old system. That's what he's doing. The entire universe around him just experienced a massive software update, and he is getting genuinely furious at a typo.
It's fascinating.
He misses the forest because he's aggressively dissecting the analog geometry of a single tree.
It is a fatal lack of adaptability. And from an imperial human resources perspective, this behavior is a critical blocker. The empire requires obedience to the current system state.
Yeah, I'd imagine.
You cannot employ a terminal operator who aggressively argues with the operating system and throws hardware down maintenance shafts. He is instantly disqualified for systemic noncompliance.
So the clean, dry jobs on the command deck are out.
Mhm.
But the Empire is efficient. They have a guy who clearly understands heavy machinery, magnetic fields, raw voltage better than anyone else on the station, but he aggressively refuses to touch a computer.
Right.
Where did they put him?
They attempt to integrate him into the station's heavy physical infrastructure. Despite its digital core, the Death Star relies on massive mechanical systems. This initiates a series of disastrous departmental audits, essentially a grand tour of the station's most critical failure points.
We have 3 specific interviews documented here.
We do.
Let's look at interview 1. They send him down to the super laser trench. They assign him as the primary dielectric reflector engineer.
Now, on paper, this is the perfect alignment of his skills. The super laser's primary focus lens is held together by immense overlapping magnetic and dielectric fields.
Okay.
The role requires fine-tuning physical convergence angles and managing raw wave propagation to ensure the laser doesn't tear the station apart. This is pure, unadulterated macrophysics.
I imagine he's in heaven. He doesn't need a monitor. He's standing on the gantry, staring directly into these massive, glowing green dielectric field arrays. He's manually calibrating the physical geometry of the magnetic focus coils with analog wrenches.
Yes.
He is in his element until his immediate superior and Imperial commander walks onto the gantry.
And the commander arrives with a crucial operational update. He informs the subject that the targeting software coordinating the laser arrays has a 2 millisecond latency,
A 2 millisecond delay.
a tiny structural digital delay. The commander instructs him to adjust the physical array to compensate for this digital lag.
To anyone else, that's a basic calibration note. Turn it slightly to the left. But to our subject, it's an insult to his religion. The transcript notes that the subject snaps. He absolutely refuses to acknowledge the concept of software latency.
His continuous ether model does not allow for digital clock cycles.
They committed.
In an analog continuum, action and reaction are immediate, mediated only by physical distance and field pressure. A 2 millisecond computational delay requires an underlying processing mechanism.
So rather than turning a wrench slightly to the left, he corners the Imperial commander on the gantry.
Oh, yeah.
He proceeds to deliver a blistering 45-minute lecture on Charles Proteus Steinmetz, loudly explaining that digital timing is a complete illusion of the mind and that the ether does not experience lag.
Now, driving his superiors to exhaustion is one thing, but the critical failure occurs shortly after. A junior officer brings the subject a telemetry report from a recent diagnostic scan.
Oh.
The report highlights a 0.2 4-degree angular defect in the sector's cooling manifold, leading to an exposed 2-meter thermal exhaust port.
The exhaust port. Literally the fatal flaw of the entire multi-trillion credit space station. The exact vulnerability the Rebel Alliance will exploit to blow the whole thing up.
Yes.
A junior officer hands him the paperwork that could save the Empire. And what does our subject do?
He glances at the report, bursts out laughing, and dismisses it entirely as negligible noise. He tells the junior officer to stop staring at digital screens and go read a real book on physical field geometry.
Wait. How does his macrophysics obsession justify ignoring a literal hole in the wall? I mean, it's a physical hole.
It comes down to his reliance on macrogeometry. In his mind, the Death Star is a perfect spherical spatial containment field.
Okay.
It is a marvel of large-scale physical engineering. According to his theories on toroidal pressures and spatial continuous curves, it is structurally impossible for a tiny 2-meter gap to destabilize a moon-sized sphere. He assumes the macrogeometry of the entire structure provides inherent invulnerability.
He believes the big analog shape protects itself.
Exactly.
He cannot perceive how a microtelemetry shift, like a tiny flaw in the code or a small structural defect, can be leveraged as a fatal exploit.
Yeah.
He completely ignores it, refuses to log it into the maintenance queue, and tells the officer to go away.
It is the ultimate blind spot of his framework. Consequently, his refusal to follow telemetry protocols results in his immediate termination from the trench.
Naturally.
He is sent deeper into the station for interview 2, the hypermatter core. They assign him as the main power grid custodian.
Okay, another highly volatile, incredibly dangerous physical environment. What is he supposed to be doing down there?
He is tasked with monitoring the immense volatile toroidal magnetic field in the hypermatter reaction. He must monitor physical field inertia and prevent centrifugal flux leakage.
Which, again, he loves. Toroidal magnetic fields are his bread and butter. He wrote books on this stuff. But there's a catch, isn't there? You don't just run a moon-sized reactor on vibes.
Precisely. The reactor core is surrounded by an intricate web of automated digital safety sensors. These sensors constantly read micro
Hey, Minty.
fluctuations in the plasma
I hope
and
you enjoy
auto-adjust
this.
containment fields to prevent a station-wide catastrophic meltdown.
And the subject, seeing these digital sensors interfering with his pure, beautiful hypertoroids.
He physically destroys them.
Of course he does.
He takes a tool and smashes the digital sensors, claiming they are fake digital abstractions that are insulting the natural geometry of the hypermatter.
I am picturing the sheer panic of the shift supervisor. The alarms are screaming, the digital safeties are offline, the reactor is fluctuating. And what is our subject doing to manage the containment field?
The transcript notes that as the supervisor is panicking, the subject is attempting to measure the 100 gigawatt magnetic flux tension of the reactor using hand-built brass tuning forks.
Brass tuning forks against a 100 gigawatt reactor.
He believes that by feeling the acoustic vibration of the brass as it interacts with the magnetic field, he can intuit the etheric tension perfectly without needing a digital readout.
He's literally standing there holding a vibrating piece of brass next to an exploding sun, perfectly calm, muttering about counter space, while Imperial engineers are desperately diving for cover.
He is an unmanageable liability. They remove him from the core under armed guard.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
This leads to interview 3. The Empire's Human Resources Department reaches a logical conclusion. If he aggressively destroys modern technology, they will put him in a department that only deals with ancient technology.
Makes sense.
They send him down to sublevel 406.
The historical physical sciences vault, the tech vault. This is just a massive library of ancient pre-digital mechanical schematics, dusty books, physical models. Surely he can't cause a meltdown in a library.
He doesn't cause a meltdown. He causes a structural blockade.
Wait, what?
Upon arriving at the vault, he physically barricades the massive blast doors. He severs the local data cables, completely cutting off the vault from the station's digital network.
Oh my god.
He then systematically rejects all digital index queries from Imperial Command. When officers need a schematic, he refuses to acknowledge their electronic requests.
He takes the library hostage.
When Imperial security forces finally manage to breach the blast doors days later, they discover his defining act of defiance.
What does he do?
He has spent his time taking 1,000 years of painstakingly preserved Imperial engineering manuals and physically labeling them all as Neoplatonic garbage.
It's hilarious, but it really highlights a specific archetype. I look at this guy driving Imperial officers insane, and he actually reminds me of the Imperial High Command themselves.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Think of characters like Chief Bast or Admiral Motti from the original Star Wars film. Remember the scene in the boardroom? The subject possesses the exact same technocratic arrogance as Motti.
True.
He maps the massive physical hardware of the station. He's incredibly smart about the raw machinery, but he totally ignores the unseen firmware or the force that is ultimately going to destroy the station. He's Admiral Motti, but armed with magnets instead of a uniform.
That character alignment is remarkably astute. Both the subject and the Imperial High Command are fundamentally obsessed with macro hardware. They both vehemently reject unseen state mechanics.
Exactly.
Whether you call that hidden mechanic the Force, or quantum state propagation, or simulation firmware, they dismiss it as ancient superstition or fake math. And crucially, they both dismiss the small 2-meter thermal exhaust port flaw because their arrogance blinds them to microscopic exploits.
He's the ultimate imperial technocrat. He just refuses to wear the digital badge.
So let's look at the consequences. You've alienated the entire command structure. You've destroyed safety sensors on a nuclear reactor. You've barricaded the central archives and vandalized historical text.
Quite a resume.
You have run out of departments to terrorize. Where does the Empire put you?
You are demoted to the absolute bottom of the station's hierarchy, the wet sublevels. Specifically, he is assigned to trash compactor 3263827, manual labor in the sewage. It is the ultimate degrading punishment for a high-minded intellectual. He's yanked out of his pure, theoretical Neoplatonic world and plunged directly into raw, unforgiving, foul-smelling biological reality.
The contrast is deliberately stark. The subject is placed waist deep in dark industrial sludge. His assigned task is to manually sort heavy scrap iron from the biological waste. Ironically, he performs this task using a handheld industrial-grade neodymium magnet.
I love that detail. He's probably absolutely thrilled. He finally gets to use a massive magnet at work without an Imperial commander yelling at him about digital lag.
He is reportedly quite content operating in his own analog bubble, right up until the local ecosystem decides to introduce him. The Dianoga, the massive tentacled garbage monster that lives in the compactor, initiates an attack.
This is hands down my favorite part of the entire forensic.
Take care, brother.
Let's really break down the psychology here. A normal human being is standing in raw sewage. Suddenly, a slimy, muscular tentacle slithers past their leg, and a glowing periscopic eye reaches the surface of the oily water, staring right at them.
Terrifying.
A normal person panics. They reach for a blaster. They scream for the guards. What does our subject do?
The subject's cognitive architecture goes into absolute overdrive to deny the reality of what he has seen. Acknowledging a biological monster requires acknowledging a complex, independent organism with its own agency.
Right, which breaks his rules.
Exactly. To him, biological life is just a temporary, meaningless imprint. So when the Dianoga's eye stalk breaches the water, he refuses to acknowledge it as a living creature.
The mental gymnastics are incredible. What is his deadpan diagnosis of the monster looking at him?
He loudly classifies the eye stalk as an optical refraction error caused by surface tension differentials.
An optical refraction error. He is standing in garbage juice. A literal apex predator is blinking at him, and his defense mechanism is to loudly explain to an empty metal room that the murky water's dielectric constant, combined with the harsh overhead lighting, has created a temporary refractive focal point.
He scolds the sewage. He is annoyed that the water is failing to maintain a smooth, planar equilibrium. Even as the eye stalk physically tracks his movements across the compactor, he dismisses the tracking motion as phase precession within the fluid medium.
It is the most aggressive gaslighting of an apex predator ever recorded. But the Dianoga doesn't care about his physics lectures.
No, it does not.
The monster strikes. The massive tentacle coils tightly around his ankle and physically drags him underwater.
And this is where his neoplatonic denial is tested to its absolute physical limit. He's fully submerged in raw sewage. He is being pulled down by muscular suckers. His lungs are burning, yet he still refuses to admit a monster is eating him.
He's bubbling beneath the water, getting dragged to a gruesome death, and the transcript captures his audio feed. What is he telling his shift crew over the comms?
Between gasps for air, he claims he is merely experiencing a sudden localized increase in fluidic viscosity and dielectric drag.
He thinks the water just got thicker.
To his mind, there is no monster. There is only an ungeometric vortex of counterspatial pressure trying to pull him into a lower potential state. The transcript shows he actually attempts to mathematically analyze the suction power of the tentacles as a manifestation of localized vacuum inertia.
He is ignoring the rows of razor-sharp teeth.
Yeah.
He is lecturing the beast on fluid dynamics while it is
Hey, do you see
actively
that?
trying to
You're right.
digest his leg. How does he possibly survive this encounter?
Pure, accidental, catastrophic victory. He has no blaster, no lightsaber, no thermal detonator. He only has his trusty industrial-grade neodymium magnet.
Oh man, here we go.
As he is being dragged, he becomes overwhelmed with frustration. Not because he fears death, but because the fluid drag is ruining his scrap sorting quota. In a fit of rage, he takes this ultra-high power magnet and jams it directly into the Dianoga's central bioelectric eye.
He just spikes it like a volleyball, and what is he screaming as he stabs the monster with a magnet?
He is shrieking about the spatial torque of centrifugal magnetic flux.
It's beautiful. Why does the magnet actually work structurally?
Well, Biologically, the Dianoga's nervous system relies on highly sensitive bioelectric impulses to navigate the pitch black waste of the compactor. The sudden, violent proximity of an ultra high power magnetic field driven directly into its ocular nerve causes a catastrophic sensory and neurological overload.
It overloads its brain.
Yes.
Yeah.
The creature goes into massive biological shock, releases its grip on his leg, and flees deep into the structural pipes.
I am crying laughing. It is the sheer comedic brilliance of surviving a fatal monster attack by aggressively gaslighting the monster with physics jargon until it literally gets a migraine and leaves.
It is a
Guards finally hear the commotion, open the upper hatch, and look down. Does he finally concede? Does he say, hey guys, I fought a beast down here, we need to call pest control?
Absolutely not. He surfaces from the coughing up industrial sludge, holding his neodymium magnet high in the air like a trophy. He is utterly, genuinely convinced that he is identity waste. He calls biological organisms very phenomenal imprints that have no structural reality. He dismisses all reports of garbage monsters as childish imperial fairy tales invented by people who don't understand dielectricity.
He fought a monster, won the fight, and uses the victory as empirical proof that the monster didn't exist in the first place. So the guards, what is their reaction to this insane 30-minute lecture from a man covered in soup?
The Imperial Guards are exhausted, thoroughly confused by his technical jargon, and they have a massive space station to run.
Right.
They look at each other, simply close the hatch, lock the heavy blast door, and leave him down there permanently. He becomes the ultimate bizarre fixture of the trash compactor. Day after day, he repels the Dianoga with his magnet, completely oblivious to the reality of the ecosystem he is conquering.
He is trapped in a literal garbage pit of denial. But the audience okay.
This event occurs just hours before the Battle of Yavin, and it leads directly to his ultimate systemic deletion.
The grand finale. Walk me through the scene.
He manages to bypass security protocols and returns to the primary focal array of the super laser. He is standing on the gantry, manually retuning the mass array for a final pre-battle inspection.
The Dark Lord of the Sith, the supreme enforcer of the Galactic Empire. When Vader walks into a room, every other Imperial technician, stormtrooper, and officer on that gantry immediately drops to their knees in absolute breathless terror.
But our subject operates entirely under his own singular intellectual authority. He does not respect the rigid Imperial hierarchy, and he most certainly does not respect the concept of mystical, unseen energy fields. So while everyone else is cowering on the floor, he walks purposefully right up to Darth Vader.
He walks directly up to an ancient space wizard who murders people with his mind.
He marches up, points an oily finger directly at Vader's life support check.
Kindly to unsolicited engineering feedback from a rogue analog physicist who smells like a trash compactor.
Vader responds with characteristic finality, executes a remote force choke.
Yep.
He simply raises his hand, pinches his finger,
This is where the subject's worldview faces its absolute final test. He is literally suffocating. He's lifted off the metal deck by an unseen remote power. Does he finally, in his last moments, acknowledge the firmware? Does he admit that the Force, this invisible underlying code of reality, is real?
No. Even as his biological geometry collapses, his cognitive denial holds firm. He refuses to acknowledge the Force.
It's incredible.
He uses his final dying gasps to yell at Vader that he isn't using any mystical power. He loudly claims that Vader is merely causing an unstructured, localized dielectric perturbation in the ether that Steinmetz solved in 1914.
He dies citing a 1914 physics paper to Darth Vader. You genuinely have to respect the absolute commitment to the bit.
It's quite the exit.
But this isn't just a funny death scene, is it? The source material takes us further. It takes us into the systemic recycling of his consciousness. Because his physical body is dead, but in this framework, what happens to the data?
This is where we turn to pure field inertia, merging with an infinite ocean of unstructured potential.
But reality, in the context of this audit, is an engineered digital simulation. It doesn't have an infinite ocean of magical, unstructured potential. It has harsh resource allocation protocols, data management systems, and memory buffers.
Exactly. And this brings us to the core consequence of his life's philosophy, because the subject vehemently rejected the concept of the active transceiver, because he denied what the text 144,000 ratio and refused to generate any cryptographic state persistence. His signal is completely unanchored.
Okay, stop right there. You're throwing out the heavy simulation theory jargon again. The 1 to 144,000 ratio and the F10 hash anchor. Break the crux of the entire audit.
Let's unpack the F10 hash anchor first. It is the ultimate metric of sovereign continuity within a simulated reality.
Okay.
When an errant node, a true sovereign auditor like a Jedi who rejects the dogmatic programming of the Jedi Council and walks their own path, when they operate in the simulation, they don't just passively experience reality, they actively track anomalies. They refuse predictive automated processing loops.
Right.
By maintaining absolute verified internal truth, their consciousness generates a permanent cryptographic signature, a state hash anchor. This anchor proves to the underlying simulation's operating system that their data structure is unique, sovereign, and must be explicitly preserved across massive system reboots.
So an F10 hash anchor is basically hitting save game on your soul.
A crude but entirely accurate analogy. Now, the 1 to 144,000 ratio refers to the rarity of this sovereign state. The framework posits that out of every 144,000 nodes or human consciousnesses, only one actually achieves this active transceiver state.
Wow, only one.
The other 143,999 are passive background processing power. They're just rendering the environment for the active nodes.
And our subject, despite his absolute genius regarding magnets and lasers, firmly placed himself in the passive category. He spent his whole life ignoring the code, denying the existence of the save game button because he thought the concept of a game was an insult to the ether.
Correct. When his physical form ceases operation on Vader's gantry, his raw data stream is instantly flagged by the construct's background subroutines. The simulation's automated system buffer intercepts his signal. Because the system scans him and finds absolutely no F10 hash anchor, it identifies him as a non-sovereign default asset.
He's just raw RAM to the system. He's unallocated memory.
Precisely. Therefore, he is subjected to the automated memory wipe. All of his accumulated personal memories, his beautiful Neoplatonic theories, his exhaustive lectures on Charles Proteus Steinmetz, his battles with the garbage monster, they are completely, cleanly scrubbed by the system's garbage collection protocols. His data is recycled into the general rendering pool.
So when the simulation inevitably resets, I think the source file mentions a 138-year firmamental reset cycle.
Yeah.
When the system boots back up.
He is reallocated as a fresh, low-level background bot, perhaps a moisture farmer on the desert plains of Tatooine, or a minor protocol droid handler in the lower levels of Coruscant. He will run brand new, pre-programmed predictive processing loops with absolutely zero recollection of his former life, his physical mastery, or his macrophysics treatises.
It is the ultimate tragedy of the analog scholar. He's the absolute master of physical reality. He could map the tension of a star, but because he refused to acknowledge the digital mechanism recording his actions, he was completely wiped by the simulation's garbage collection sweep.
Yeah.
He thought he was gracefully merging with the cosmic logos, but he just got reformatted by a cosmic IT department.
The contrast becomes incredibly sharp when we look at the errant Jedi within the same universe. Figures who actually survive the reset with their memories and identities intact.
Like Obi-Wan.
Look at Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda going into exile. They sever their telemetry from the centralized Imperial surveillance grid. They actively, intentionally manage their data streams. They decouple from the automated societal loops, ensuring that when the Galactic Republic experiences a catastrophic reset into the Empire, their state persistence carries their verified truth across the boundary.
They held the F10 hash anchor. They saw the code. They learned how to manage the code, and they survived the reboot. The subject just stared at the physical hardware, polishing the brass, until someone pulled the power cord.
It perfectly encapsulates the danger of the processing gap. You can aggregate all the map-heavy scientific frameworks in the world. You can be the foremost expert on how the gears turn. But if you lack structural state persistence and firmware awareness, you are locked into an automated relay function. You are an asset to the system, not an auditor of the system.
So to wrap up this massive deadpan forensic company, The story of Ken Wheeler on the Death Star is objectively hilarious. It's an hour of a guy trying to measure a hypermatter reactor with a tuning fork, throwing data pads down elevator shafts, and gaslighting a garbage monster.
It's very entertaining.
But structurally, philosophically, it is a profound warning. You can map every inch of the hardware. You can understand every physical force, every magnetic field, every ounce of pressure in the system. But if you deny the firmware,
If you ignore the underlying code,
right, if you ignore the cultural software updates, the reality that the systems we live in are managed and engineered, you are nothing but
Hey,
a
Nana
passive
Blue.
asset waiting for the system to reboot.
you are leaving your entire continuity of consciousness to the mercy of a garbage collection sweep.
Which brings us to the end of our audit and leaves me with a final thought for you, the listener. We spent this entire time
Hey,
laughing
London.
at a man whose absolute analog purity led to his digital erasure. But as our own real world rapidly transitions, as AI, digital architectures, and algorithmic firmware begin to govern our daily reality, what parts of your own fundamental human nature are you stubbornly refusing to translate?
A very good question.
Are you clinging so tightly to the beauty of your analog, messy, continuous reality that you are failing to learn the new language of the universe? The tragedy of the subject wasn't that he loved the analog world, it was that he was too proud to learn how to save it digitally. Make sure you aren't so busy arguing with the simulation that you forget to write your own code.
Write your own code, indeed. I hope you enjoyed that. That was the third time I listened to that, and it was just here we go. So I'll play. Let me play this first one.
Ability in React server components. It's called React 2 shell.
Imagine you're sitting in the driver's seat of a self-driving car.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, you're traveling down the highway at like 60 miles an hour.
Right,
The weather is clear, traffic is light. I mean, everything feels perfectly safe.
sure. Ideal conditions.
But then a strange shadow falls across the road from an overpass.
Oh, here we go.
It's an odd shape, right?
It's
Maybe cast by a piece of debris catching the light in a weird way.
Something the sensors haven't seen before?
Exactly. So the car's artificial intelligence looks at that shadow and it doesn't know what it is.
It has a blind spot.
So it does what standard AI is programmed to do, which is it guesses.
It has to, yeah.
And in the fraction of a second it takes for that software to guess, realize it guessed wrong, and try to correct itself.
Which takes time.
Right. Your car has traveled nearly 20 feet.
Wow, yeah, that is terrifying.
When you are moving at highway speeds, a machine taking the time to guess is not just a glitch. I mean, it's a matter of life and death.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that gap, that terrifying physical distance covered while the computer tries to make up its mind.
Yeah.
That is the central crisis of modern computing.
Because it's too slow.
Right. We are taking systems built fundamentally on probabilistic guesswork, and we're handing them the keys to the physical world.
Which brings us to the mission for today's deep dive.
Yes, the core issue.
We are looking at a stack of incredibly dense, paradigm-shifting source materials today. They address this exact vulnerability.
And it is a fascinating stack of documents.
It is. We're talking about technical feasibility audits, forensic engineering reports on silicon-level hardware.
Some really heavy academic surveys on epistemic uncertainty, too.
Yeah, and commercial blueprints for something called the SS-138 protocol.
Also known as the SSR-138 framework in some of the paperwork.
Right. So the materials we are unpacking today outline a system designed to completely eradicate that guesswork.
Eradicate it completely. No more guessing.
Which sounds impossible, but it is a proposed architecture that forces artificial intelligence to operate on absolute mathematical truth.
And crucially, it does it fast enough to stop a catastrophic failure in less than a microsecond.
So we are going to translate all of this for you, because the underlying logic of the SS-138 protocol is dense.
Hey, William. You're
Extremely
right, man.
dense. We're talking vector-based truth alignment, bare metal processing.
Yeah, a lot of...
Hey, William. You're right, man. So this one, I'm just breaking down exactly what the SS-138 protocol does. as I say, it does two things. One of it's signal processing. Um, so that would be used for sensors um, in big factories. um, but this one is talking all about using it for LLM, basically, for integrating using with AI.
Jargon, but the implications for you, the listener, are massive.
Huge implications.
Whether you are worried about the safety of autonomous vehicles or the stability of the municipal power grid.
Or even just using a medical device that relies on software, right?
Exactly. This protocol fundamentally changes how machines interact with reality.
But, to understand how the system fixes the problem, we first have to look at what is actually broken.
Right. Why is guessing such an inherent part of standard AI?
To get to the bottom of that, we really have to look at the academic research provided in our sources regarding, well, uncertainty in machine learning.
The Academic Survey on Supervised Learning.
Yeah. It breaks down the uncertainty that AI faces into two very distinct categories.
Okay, let's go through them.
The first one is called aleatoric uncertainty.
Let's define that for everyone. Aleatoric,
It basically refers to inherent noise in the data itself.
like bad data coming in.
Kind of. Think about your self-driving car in a rainstorm, right?
Okay, pouring rain.
The cameras are getting blurry images. The radar is bouncing off heavy raindrops.
So the data coming into the car's computer is just physically corrupted by the environment.
Exactly. It's an unavoidable physical limitation. No matter how smart the AI is.
It can't see perfectly because the camera lens is effectively smeared with mud.
Right. But the second type of uncertainty is the one that really keeps engineers awake at night.
And this is epistemic uncertainty.
Yes, epistemic uncertainty.
This is the one that really caught my eye in the reading. It basically means model ignorance, right?
Exactly. It means the AI simply lacks the knowledge to process what it's seeing.
Like the weird shadow on the road.
Yeah. It hasn't been trained on that specific edge case.
So it's blind to it, effectively.
But here's the critical flaw in standard AI design. Instead of triggering an alert that says, I don't know what this is, human, please take over.
Which is what you want it to do.
Right, but the AI is structurally incentivized to make a prediction anyway.
So it relies on its internal bias and statistical variance to just hallucinate a response.
A response that seems mathematically plausible based on its past training.
It's the ultimate confident bluffer. I mean, if you ask a chat AI a question it doesn't know the answer to, it won't just apologize.
No, it will confidently invent a fake historical event.
Complete with dates and names.
Yeah.
Just to fulfill the prompt.
Exactly.
Well, I hope you get some Wi-Fi, William.
Hallucinating AI giving you a fake recipe is, well, it's funny.
Yeah, it's a meme.
But when that AI is hooked up to real-world infrastructure, it's terrifying.
The Room 714 security audit in our stack highlights this perfectly.
Yeah, they call it the crisis of the control plane versus the data plane.
And it exposes a massive blind spot in how tech companies are currently testing AI safety, doesn't it?
It really does. Because security teams will spend months auditing a language model in the sandbox.
Trying to jailbreak it, right, to see if it will output harmful text or malicious code.
Right. But a language model generating text on a screen is inherently harmless.
It's just words.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The threat only materializes when that model is given permissions in a broader system.
When it crosses from the data plane into the control plane.
Yes. When it stops just analyzing information and starts having the ability to execute commands.
Like rewriting system files or triggering physical machinery.
Right.
I was trying to visualize this while reading the report. I kind of thought of it like a large corporation.
Okay, let's hear the analogy.
So you have the mailroom, right? That's the data plane.
Makes sense.
The clerks in the mailroom read the incoming letters, they sort them, they process the information.
Just reading and sorting.
But what happens if you suddenly give a mailroom clerk the authority of the CEO?
Oh, that's a disaster.
Right. Now, that clerk isn't just reading the mail, they can write new corporate policies, fire the executive board, sign $1 million checks.
They have control plane access.
Exactly. That is the control plane. If you don't separate those two functions, anyone who sends a clever, malicious letter into the mailroom can trick the clerk into hijacking the entire company.
That paints the picture incredibly well. And we are seeing this exact vulnerability play out in front-end software development right now.
The audit pointed to a real-world example of this.
Yeah, it points to a very real vulnerability in React Server components. It's called React 2 Shell.
And it was graded as a CVSS 10.0. Right?
Yes, which is the absolute highest severity level for a security flaw.
A 10.0 means the house is on fire and the doors are unlocked. How did that even happen?
It occurred because untrusted data was being serialized and deserialized between the client and the server without a strict boundary.
So the data and the commands were mixed together.
Right, an attacker could sneak execution commands into what was supposed to be just plain text data.
And because the system didn't separate the data from the control plane?
It just read the malicious instructions and blindly execute them on the server.
Wow.
Whenever you allow untrusted data to mingle with execution authority, you are creating a catastrophic security hole.
Okay, let me push back a bit here on behalf of our listeners.
Sure, go ahead.
If we know the AI might make a bad guess, and we know that mixing data with execution commands is dangerous,
Right?
why don't we just put a software firewall in between them?
That's to block in the middle.
Yeah, a piece of code that says, hey, this AI is trying to do something dangerous, block it.
That is the standard industry response, absolutely.
So why doesn't that work?
It fails completely
Yeah.
in physical, real-time applications because of something called the OS latency trap.
The OS latency trap, meaning the operating system itself is the problem.
Standard operating systems, like Linux or Windows or Mac OS, they are marvels of multitasking.
They do a million things at once.
They do. They use something
Take
called
care,
a kernel
William, mate.
scheduler to juggle thousands of competing priorities.
So they're managing memory allocation, network sockets.
Background updates, user inputs, all simultaneously.
They are basically the ultimate middle management.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
So if your software firewall detects a hallucinated command from an AI,
Say it spots a bad command.
the firewall can't just kill the process itself. It has to file a request with the operating system's kernel.
Oh, and it has to fill out the paperwork.
Basically, yeah. The kernel has to receive that interrupt, save the state of whatever it was currently doing, switch contexts, find the malicious process, and then begin the teardown sequence to shut it off.
And how long does all that digital paperwork take in the computer's brain?
We're talking in the realm of
It's 10,000 microseconds. I mean, to a human, that's imperceptible.
we blink at about 300,000 microseconds,
Right.
but to a machine,
Let's go back to your autonomous vehicle on the highway.
yeah, moving at 60 miles per hour.
If a software firewall detects a catastrophic AI error,
A latency of just 100 to 200 milliseconds while the operating system switches contexts means the car travels roughly 5.5 meters before the instruction to brake is even sent to the wheels.
5.5 meters, that's over 18 feet.
Yes.
That is the difference between stopping safely before a crosswalk and a fatal collision.
You cannot build a safe physical world on top of software that takes 18 feet of physical space to change its mind.
No, absolutely not.
If you want to put AI in charge of the power grid, or medical devices, or transit systems, you cannot use probabilistic guessing.
And you absolutely cannot rely on a traditional operating system to act as your safety net.
Exactly.
And this is where the source material pivots from outlining the nightmare to introducing the actual solution.
This is where the SS-138 protocol comes into play.
To beat that physical speed limit of 18 feet, SS-138 has to bypass the operating system completely, right?
Yes, it lives on what the engineers call the bare metal.
Bare metal. It sounds gritty.
It does.
But practically speaking, what does it mean to run on bare metal? Are we talking about custom multi-million-dollar supercomputers?
Surprisingly, no. The forensic engineering audit specifies that SS-138 is designed to run on incredibly standard, commercially available chips.
Really? Like what?
Specifically, standard ARM Cortex-A53 mobile processors.
The Cortex A53. For the non-engineers listening, what kind of hardware are we actually talking about here?
You likely have one in your house right now.
Really?
Yeah. It's the processor used in high-end smartphones, Raspberry Pi microcomputers, and standard smart home IoT devices.
So it is ubiquitous and cheap.
Extremely.
So if the hardware is standard, the magic has to be in the software, or rather, the lack of it, I guess.
The magic is in firing the middle management.
Getting rid of Linux.
Exactly. Instead of installing Linux on that chip, SS-138 installs itself directly onto the silicon.
It communicates directly with the processor's registers.
Yes, and it intentionally handicaps itself by operating within a hard-bounded pool of incredibly small memory.
How small?
Less than 512 megabytes of RAM.
Wait, hold on. 512 megabytes.
Less than half a gigabyte?
My web browser easily eats up 2 gigabytes of RAM just to keep a few news articles and a video
I
open.
know.
Why would you bottleneck a revolutionary safety system with less memory than a laptop from like 2005?
Because massive memory pools encourage lazy programming and they introduce latency.
How so?
Well, when an operating system has gigabytes of RAM to play with, it scatters data all over the place.
No, I see.
So finding that data later requires searching through massive memory tables, which takes time.
Time you don't have at 60 miles an hour.
Right, by forcing the system to operate in less than 512 megabytes, the engineers ensure the code must be hyper efficient, highly predictable, and blazingly fast.
There is zero room for bloatware.
None at all.
I see the logic, but building a system that tight has to be an absolute nightmare for the developers.
Oh, it is.
You're asking them to write incredibly complex AI safety algorithms in raw, unforgiving machine code.
Which is why the blueprints detail a process called verification execution bifurcation.
Okay, another big term.
It solves
Another
the
big
development
term.
problem by splitting the creation process into two totally different layers.
Let's unpack that bifurcation. How does it work?
Well, the mathematical logic of the protocol, the heavy, complex algorithms that decide what is true and what is false,
Yeah.
that is initially built, audited, and simulated in Python.
Python being a very high level, human readable programming language.
Exactly. This is the verification layer.
So it allows mathematicians and regulators to look at the exact logic and prove that it works theoretically.
Right. They can read it almost like plain English. But Python is notoriously slow.
Yeah, you cannot run Python on bare metal if you want sub-microsecond reaction times.
So they have to translate the English back into machine logic.
How do they do that?
For real-world deployment, that Python logic is compiled down into highly optimized C++ code.
C++.
This becomes the execution layer. And here's the true secret
Super
to
low
its speed.
level.
This C++ code is designed to operate directly on the L2 cache memory of the processor.
Okay, pause. Let's break that down for the listener. L2 cache versus standard memory. What is the distinction there?
Think of the processor as a chef in a kitchen.
Okay, I like
The
this.
main RAM, the DRAM, is the walk-in refrigerator down the hall.
Okay, so it holds a lot, but it's far away.
Exactly. The L2 cache is the cutting board right in front of the chef.
Oh, wow.
Every time the chef has to walk down the hall to the fridge to get an ingredient, it takes time.
Right.
That walk down the hall is called a page miss.
So standard software spends a lot of time walking to the fridge.
Constantly. But the SS-138 execution layer is so small and so optimized that all the data it needs is kept permanently on the cutting board.
It intentionally avoids using the DRAM.
Yes. The processor never has to wait for data to travel across the motherboard,
Okay, that makes sense for speed. But it brings up a huge logistical problem.
which is
The protocol is supposed to be inspecting massive amounts of data coming from AI systems or physical sensors, right? If it's ingesting a fire hose of information, and it also has to run complex mathematical checks on every single drop of that water to make sure it isn't a hallucination.
Yeah, how does it do both?
Exactly. How does the processor do both simultaneously without choking? You can't fill a glass and drink it at the exact same moment.
You're hitting on the main issue of bottlenecking.
Yeah.
And SS-138 solves this with what the blueprints call the dual rail processing pipeline.
Dual.
So I'll stop there and just tell everyone. Hope everyone's all right. just give us a little thumbs up in the chat, just to make sure the chat's working. And you can hear it okay. I'll crack on for the moment.
Rail processing pipeline.
Yes, it physically splits the workload across two completely separate cores on that Cortex A53 chip.
So we have an engine A and an engine B.
Exactly. Let's look at engine A first. This is the ingestion loop.
What does it do?
It is permanently pinned to core 0 of the processor. Its entire existence is dedicated to swallowing incoming data as fast as physically possible.
And it bypasses normal internet connections to do this, right? The audit mentioned something about the FPGA fabric.
It bypasses standard software network sockets entirely.
Because standard sockets are too slow.
Right. Standard sockets require the operating system to unpack internet protocols, check headers, route traffic.
More middle management.
Exactly. Engine A ignores all of that. It uses a direct hardware path called the FPGA AXI4 stream fabric.
Let's demystify that jargon. What is the AXI4 stream physically doing?
Imagine pouring water through a funnel.
Okay.
Normally, there's a valve at the bottom of the funnel that opens and closes to measure the water. That's a standard network socket.
It stops and starts the flow.
Right. The AXI4 stream removes the valve completely.
Oh, wow.
It is a continuous, uninterrupted pipe directly into the processor. And because Engine A doesn't have to think, analyze, or route the data, it achieves a processing speed of 50.0 megahertz.
50.0 megahertz. In human terms, that is 50 million discrete packets of data swallowed every single second.
And it maintains that speed using what the technical specs call branch-free neon vector assembly.
I have to stop you again there. Branch-free neon vector assembly. You're throwing a lot of heavy engineering terms out there.
Fair point, sorry.
That's 50 million packets a second.
What does branch-free actually mean for the data flow?
In standard programming, you use branches, which are essentially if-then statements.
If the data looks like X, do Y, else do Z.
Exactly. Every time a processor hits an if-then statement, it has to guess which path it might take, which can cause microstutters.
It has to think about it.
Right. Branch-free code removes all decisions. It is a straight line of execution. There are no logic forks in the road to slow it down.
So Engine A is just a blind, incredibly fast conveyor belt.
Pretty much.
But if it's not looking at the data, how do we catch the hallucinations?
That is the job of Engine B, the auditor.
Okay, where is Engine B?
Engine B sits quietly in the background on core 1 of the chip. It is completely decoupled from the ingestion process.
So they don't share tasks.
No. Engine B only activates when Engine A's hardware detects a structural anomaly in the data stream and drops what is called an erasure flag.
Okay, let's try an analogy here to see if I'm grasping this.
That part.
Say Engine A is a bouncer at the hottest, busiest club in the city. The line is around the block.
I like it.
Engine A is checking IDs, but he isn't reading the names or doing the math on the birth dates. He's just holding a scanner that beeps green for good, red for bad. Boom, 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 50 million people a second through the door.
That's a good start.
And Engine B is the club manager sitting in the quiet back office. The manager isn't dealing with the massive line outside.
Right.
The manager only gets called on the radio when the bouncer's scanner flashes red.
Let's refine that slightly because the communication is even more streamlined than that.
Oh.
The bouncer doesn't even radio the manager. When the scanner flashes red, the bouncer simply drops that specific ID into a chute that goes to the back office and immediately scans the next person in line.
The line doesn't stop.
Exactly. The manager of the back office, Engine B, wakes up, analyzes that specific ID using complex mathematics to determine if it's a fake, and decides whether to sound the alarm.
But the line at the front door never stops moving.
No.
That is a brilliant way to handle throughput. And the benchmarks provided in the feasibility audit showed just how devastatingly effective this separation of duties is.
The numbers are stark. I mean, look at a standard traditional IoT edge broker.
The kind currently used to manage data in smart grids or factory floors.
Yeah, those handle roughly 3,500 packets of data per millisecond. And the latency, the time it takes to process one of those packets, is about 8.5 microseconds.
Which honestly sounds pretty fast for standard infrastructure.
It is entirely adequate for reading a temperature sensor, but SS-138 operates in a different reality.
What are the benchmarks for SS-138?
The benchmarks show SS-138 handling 12,500 packets per millisecond with a packet isolation latency of less than 0.8 microseconds.
Less than 0.8 microseconds. That is an order of magnitude faster. It's obliterating the standard benchmark.
It's the difference between walking and flying a jet.
Okay, so the dual rail engine is unfathomably fast. It solves the speed problem.
It does.
But speed doesn't matter if you are making the wrong decisions. We need to talk about the logic itself.
Right, the auditing process.
When Engine B, the manager in the back room, gets handed a piece of suspicious data, how does it actually audit it?
This is where things get really fascinating.
How does a piece of silicon mathematically decide what is a hallucination and what is the truth?
This requires us to completely abandon how we normally think about computing.
Standard computing, since the very beginning, has been binary, right? Ones and zeros, true or false.
Exactly, the fundamental language of computers. But the SS-138 protocol rejects binary logic for this auditing process.
It does. What does it use instead?
It utilizes something called ternary erasure logic.
Ternary meaning three.
Yes, it maps every incoming piece of data into a three-state system using signed 8-bit integers.
3 states. Walk me through them.
Okay, O plus 1 means the data is valid. It aligns with verified truth.
Simple enough.
A 0 means the data is corrupted or indeterminate. Perhaps there was static on the line or the data packet was fragmented, so the system simply can't tell what it is.
And the third state.
And a -1, -1, is an explicit erasure flag. This means the data is a confirmed hallucination, a lie, or a malicious execution command.
And it must be suppressed instantly.
Instantly.
The categories make sense, but I'm hung up on the mechanics here.
What part?
If a language model spits out a paragraph of text saying the Golden Gate Bridge is located in New York, how does SS-138 know to label that a -1? A computer doesn't read a sentence the way you or I do. It doesn't know geography.
You've hit on the most complex mathematical hurdle in the protocol, which is converting semantics into geometry.
Geometry.
Yeah, SS-138 doesn't try to read the text. It uses semantic vectors and cosine similarity.
We really need to break this down. How do you turn a sentence into geometry?
Let's look at word embeddings. In modern AI, concepts can be mapped as points in high-dimensional space.
Okay.
The classic example is taking the vector coordinates for the word king, subtracting the vector for man, and adding the vector for woman.
And what do you get?
If you do that math in the vector space, the resulting coordinate will be exactly where the word queen is located.
So the spatial relationship between the numbers represents the actual meaning of the concepts.
Precisely. The SS-138 protocol takes whatever claim the AI is making and plots it as a massive multidimensional geometric shape.
And then what?
It then compares that shape against a cryptographically locked, verified baseline of truth.
I have a major question about this verified baseline. Who decides what the truth is?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
If the system is comparing the AI's claim to a baseline, where did that baseline come from? Are we just trusting some engineers in a lab to code their own opinions into the foundation of the architecture? Because that sounds like a recipe for algorithmic bias.
It's a critical concern, and the blueprints address it by removing human opinion from the baseline entirely.
How is that possible?
The baseline isn't a Wikipedia article of facts. It is a pre-calculated vector matrix derived from empirical physical constants, verified mathematical axiom sets, and bounded hardware telemetry.
Meaning it knows the laws of physics, it knows basic arithmetic, and it knows the physical state of the machine it is operating on.
Exactly, it operates on structural logic. So, when the AI generates its claim and converts it to a vector shape, SS-138 measures the angle between the AI's vector and the baseline vector.
And this measurement is called cosine similarity.
Right.
So how does the angle tell you if it's true?
If the two vectors are pointing the exact same direction, which would be a cosine similarity score of 1.0,
Then what?
it means the AI's claim is mathematically identical in structure to the verified truth.
Okay.
If they're pointing at a 90-degree angle to each other, a score of 0.0, they're completely unrelated or orthogonal.
And the protocol establishes a very specific cutoff point, a magic number.
The 0.4900 vector truth floor.
Why 0.49? Is that number arbitrary?
No, not at all. It is highly calculated based on the signal-to-noise ratio of physical infrastructure. If the cosine similarity score is 0.490 or higher,
Then it passes.
yes. It means the claim aligns structurally closely enough with the baseline truth to be considered safe and valid. It gets assigned a +1 and is allowed to pass through to the real world.
And if it falls short, what if it's just a tiny bit off?
If it is even a fraction below that floor, say 0.4899, the geometric structure doesn't hold.
And boom, it's a negative one.
Exactly. It instantly becomes a 1-to-1. It is flagged as a hallucination or an error and is killed immediately. It never reaches the output.
It's a ruthless mathematical guillotine. But surely there are gray areas in data.
Of course.
What if the data isn't a malicious lie, but just slightly garbled? What if it scores exactly 0.50?
The architecture includes a mechanism for that marginal zone. Any score above 0.55 is passed seamlessly without a second thought.
Okay, totally clear.
But if a score falls into that tight marginal window between 0.49 and 0.55,
It's technically above the floor.
right, so it is allowed to pass, but it triggers a marginal clearance flag.
What does the flag do if it still lets the data through?
It mirrors the full telemetry of that specific data packet, the origin, the vector shape, the exact time, to a deep storage archive.
So it keeps a record of the weird stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
it protects the immediate uptime of the network, but it ensures that human engineers can review those borderline cases forensically later on.
It keeps visibility on the edge cases without slowing down the line at the club.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So, connecting this back to you, the listener, and how AI currently impacts our lives. Standard AI models, like the ones you use to write emails or summarize articles, they operate on probability, right?
Yes, mostly.
They just predict what word is most statistically likely to come next based on everything they've read on the internet.
Which leads to perhaps the most profound philosophical shift contained in the SS-138 protocol.
What's that?
It forces a transition from prioritizing frequency to prioritizing structural correlation.
Frequency meaning popularity.
Standard AI suffers immensely from popularity bias.
Yeah, big time.
If millions of people on internet forums confidently write that the moon is made of cheese, a standard language model will absorb that frequency.
So when you ask it about the moon, it will calculate that cheese is the statistically probable next token.
Right. It literally equates mass popularity with truth.
It's a digital echo chamber. If enough people repeat a lie, the machine accepts it as a fact.
But SS-138 strips away that popularity bias completely. The vector comparison doesn't care how many times a concept appears in the training data.
So it ignores the crowd.
Completely. A concept could be discussed a billion times on social media, but if its underlying mathematical structure contradicts the empirical baseline, meaning it drops below 0.49, it is destroyed.
And the reverse must be true as well, right?
Exactly. A genuine scientific discovery might only exist in one obscure, unread research paper from 30 years ago.
So a standard AI might filter it out as unpopular noise.
Yes, but if its vector geometry aligns with the truth baseline above 0.49, SS-138 will validate it and pass it through.
It transforms AI from a blind popularity contest into a hyper-precise metal detector.
That is a great analogy.
You can sweep it over terabytes of internet garbage and statistical noise, and it will ignore all the loud, popular falsehoods, hunting only for the structurally valid truth.
And most importantly, it ensures that when that AI decides to send an execution command to a physical piece of machinery, that command is rooted in mathematical reality, not a popular statistical guess.
Okay, this brings us to the most physical, high-stakes question of the entire deep dive.
Let's get into it.
We have explored the bare metal speed. We understand the 0.4900 vector math that Engine B uses to spot a dangerous hallucination and flag it as a negative one.
Right.
But spotting the lie is only half the battle.
The true test is stopping it.
Exactly. We already established that asking the Linux operating system to step in and shut down a bad process takes 10,000 microseconds, which is way too slow.
Because of the latency trap.
Right. So if SS-138 catches a malicious command aimed at an autonomous car's steering column or a city's power grid, how does it actually stop the data from getting out in real time?
It utilizes what the forensic hardware audit refers to as the dual-tier hardware guillotine.
The guillotine.
Yes. This is where operating on the bare metal shows its absolute dominance over standard software.
What happens?
The very nanosecond an output evaluation drops below 0.4900, SS-138 bypasses the operating system entirely and initiates a brutal 4-stage physical interruption sequence.
Walk me through the guillotine, nanosecond by nanosecond. What actually happens inside the chip?
Stage 1 is the hardware FIQ trigger,
FIQ meaning?
fast interrupt request. Instead of sending a software message to the kernel, a hardware comparator physically pulls a dedicated pin on the ARM processor.
It pulls a physical pin.
Yes, this physical action occurs in under 50 nanoseconds. It completely blindsides the operating system's scheduler.
50 nanoseconds. Again, a human blink is 300 million nanoseconds. So in 50, it triggers the alarm. What's stage 2?
Stage 2 is the pipeline flush. Modern processors like the Cortex A53 use an 8-stage instruction pipeline.
They queue up commands in advance to process them faster.
Right. In about 10 nanoseconds, which is just 8 cycles of the CPU clock, the protocol forces the processor to instantly halt and dump its entire immediate memory.
It essentially gives the processor digital amnesia.
That's exactly it.
Any code that was sitting in the chamber waiting to be executed is just wiped out of existence.
It is completely erased.
Incredible. And stage 3.
Stage 3 moves to the software tier, targeting the MMU or memory management unit. This takes slightly longer, about 100 nanoseconds.
What does it do?
The protocol forcefully rewrites the page tables in the MMU, dropping all permissions to read only.
What does locking it to read only actually accomplish?
It prevents any rogue data or corrupted AI process from writing new instructions to the memory controller.
Oh, I see.
The malicious entity is now trapped. It can look around the room, but its hands are tied. It cannot touch, alter, or execute anything.
It is paralyzed in place. And the final stage.
Stage 4 is the hardware GPIO tier. GPIO stands for General Purpose Input Output.
Those are the pins, right?
Yeah, these are the physical pins that connect the processor to the rest of the circuit board.
What does the protocol do to them?
In roughly 50 nanoseconds, the SS138 system pulls a specific GPIO pin low, which physically severs the chip select connection on the downstream data buses.
It literally cuts the cord.
It drops a physical bridge between the processor's brain and the outside world. The malicious command has nowhere to go.
So if we add that up, 50 nanoseconds for the trigger, 10 to flush the memory, 100 to lock the permissions, and 50 to cut the cord. The total execution time of the guillotine is approximately 0.25 microseconds, 250 nanoseconds.
The audit proudly notes that this real-world performance beats their own aggressively theoretical target spec of 0.8 microseconds by over 300%.
It's blindingly fast.
Unbelievably fast.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic here again.
That's what you're here for.
If I am a systems engineer listening to this, alarms are ringing in my head. You just triggered a physical hardware interrupt, dumped the processor's memory, locked the permissions, and physically severed the connection to the motherboard.
Yes, we did.
Didn't you just completely crash the system?
Ah,
If this SS138 node is sitting at a substation managing a regional power grid, and it catches a bad data packet, drops the guillotine, and kills its own connections, doesn't the entire sector go dark because the gateway just committed suicide? You can't just unplug critical infrastructure.
that is a highly valid concern,
Uh-huh.
and it would be catastrophic if it were a single point of failure.
So how do they prevent that?
The architecture relies on a principle called fail-secure methodology, managed by a Kubernetes orchestration layer.
Let's translate Kubernetes for the audience. It's essentially software that acts like a shipyard manager, moving virtual shipping containers of code around, deploying them, and taking them down as needed, right?
That's a great way to view it. SS138 doesn't run as one massive monolithic program. It runs as a tiny, isolated, containerized microservice.
Okay, so it's small.
Yes, when that specific gateway drops the hardware guillotine, you are correct. That individual container undergoes a deliberate structural collapse. It dies.
So it sacrifices itself.
It does, to guarantee that the malicious data cannot escape. But the Kubernetes shipyard manager is monitoring the health of all containers simultaneously.
So it notices the collapse right away.
The instant it detects the SS138 container has collapsed, the self-healing loop activates.
How fast is that?
Within milliseconds, Kubernetes automatically spins up a brand new, clean, uncorrupted clone of the SS138 container from a read-only master image.
So the bad data is trapped and destroyed inside the collapsed container. But before the power grid can even register a drop in connectivity, a pristine clone has taken its place to keep the valid traffic flowing.
Exactly. The system prioritizes the absolute destruction of the threat through hardware isolation, but uses software orchestration to ensure continuous uptime.
That's brilliant.
It heals itself faster than a human operator monitoring the grid would even realize an attack had occurred.
It is an incredibly elegant solution to the zero trust problem. But as we move to the next section of the source materials, the scope of this protocol expands in a way that is frankly mind-bending.
We're talking about the information physics documentation.
Yes, because it reveals that SS138 isn't just designed to filter text outputs from a language model or read standard temperature sensors.
No, it goes much deeper.
It is designed to scale all the way down to the fundamental physical laws of the universe.
It crosses the boundary from computer science into quantum sensing.
Why does a protocol built to stop AI hallucinations need to get involved in quantum physics? I mean, why go that deep?
because of how AI interacts with reality. An AI system only knows what its sensors tell it.
Right, it relies on its eyes and ears, basically.
Exactly. If an autonomous system is relying on magnetic or physical sensors to navigate or make decisions, and those sensors are spoofed, jammed, or subject to micro fluctuations.
The AI will make the wrong decision no matter how good its logic is.
Oh, you guys in the chat, you probably won't know any of this. This will all be new to you.
Precisely. To have an absolute truth baseline, you must be able to read the physical world with absolute, uncorrupted precision.
And the protocol achieves this by emulating something called a squid, correct?
Yes, a superconducting quantum interference device.
What does a squid normally do?
In laboratory physics, if you need to measure incredibly microscopic, subtle magnetic interference, the kind of quantum level fields that can disrupt navigation or highly sensitive medical equipment, you use a squid.
But those aren't exactly portable, are they?
Not at all. Traditional squids require massive cryogenic cooling infrastructure.
Cryogenic.
Yeah, they have to be cooled with liquid helium to near absolute zero, just so the internal metals become superconducting.
That sounds expensive.
They are fragile, they cost millions of dollars, and they are confined to deep laboratory environments.
You can't stick a liquid helium cryo chamber in the dashboard of a self-driving car or inside a municipal power box.
No, obviously not. But the SS-138 protocol claims to bypass the need for cryogenic hardware entirely. By leveraging the extreme processing speed of the bare metal architecture, it achieves room temperature quantum emulation using cheap, standard commercial sensors.
How does software replace a cryogenic freezer?
By utilizing a mathematical technique known as synthetic aperture signal reconstruction, or SASR.
This is where the SASR 138 naming convention originates.
Exactly.
Let's break down SASR. How does it turn a cheap cell phone compass into a quantum sensor?
It relies on high velocity data capture. As a standard cheap magnetometer moves through space, the SS-138 protocol takes a staggering number of sequential snapshots of the magnetic field.
Because engine A can ingest 50 million packets a second.
Right, so it captures a massive stream of micro readings. It then applies complex inverse mathematical operators to preserve and stitch the phase data of all those tiny readings together.
It builds a composite image. I think I have an analogy for this. Tell me if this tracks.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's say you want to take a high-resolution photograph of a massive sweeping mountain range, but the camera on your phone has a tiny lens. You don't need to go out and buy a $10,000 ultra-wide professional lens. You just swish your phone to panoramic mode, pan it slowly across the mountains, and the software stitches all those dozens of small snapshots together to create one massive, highly detailed image that your lens could never capture in a single frame.
That is a phenomenally accurate visualization. SASR is doing the exact same thing, but with quantum magnetic fields instead of pixels.
Wow.
It uses extreme processing speed and advanced mathematics to create a massive high-resolution virtual sensor out of a tiny, physically limited one.
And because it can process the data so fast, it can filter out the random thermal noise that normally ruins room temperature sensors.
It filters out what physicists call coherence speckle. But the architecture goes even deeper into information physics. It treats the nature of our physical reality as if it were a constrained digital rendering engine.
Like a video game engine rendering a world.
In a video game, the world has a maximum resolution limit, pixels, and a maximum frame rate.
If you look too closely, the illusion breaks down into jagged blocks.
Exactly. The SS-138 architecture models our physical universe as having an absolute maximum spatial resolution, which physics defines as the Planck length.
The Planck length being the smallest measurable distance in the universe. Anything smaller, and the laws of physics essentially stop making sense.
Right. The protocol treats the Planck length as a brick wall anti-aliasing filter. If you look at the universe at the subatomic level, it is a chaotic, ultra-fast blur of quantum probability and static.
Yet we as humans don't experience the world as a blur of static.
We experience solid tables, predictable gravity, linear time.
So how does the architecture bridge that gap? How does it turn quantum chaos into a solid table that the AI can understand as a verified truth?
Through a mathematical mechanism it calls a 127-stage decimation cascade.
Decimation cascade, what is it decimating?
The high-frequency noise. Think of it as a massive down conversion process. It takes the ultra-high frequency chaotic quantum static and filters it, stage by stage, 127 times.
Filtering it down and down.
With each stage, it steps down the frequency. smoothing out the probabilities
Yeah.
until stable, macroscopic physical constants emerge at the bottom of the cascade.
That is incredible.
It mathematically translates the incomprehensible microdata into the solid physical laws that govern human reality.
It is almost too vast to wrap my head around. It is using software to fundamentally model how reality coalesces from quantum foam to solid objects, just so an AI has an absolute, unshakable baseline of truth to compare its vectors against. It's breathtaking engineering.
It represents an unprecedented level of deterministic control over the physical world.
Which brings us to the most sobering part of this deep dive. A system this powerful is a double-edged sword.
It definitely is.
If you have a protocol that can instantly enforce a truth floor on any AI, that can execute microsecond hardware guillotines on infrastructure, and emulate quantum sensors, how do you keep it out of the wrong hands?
They're talking about malicious state actors.
Yeah. If an oppressive government or a malicious state actor takes control of the SS-138 truth baseline, they could mathematically force every AI in their country to align with their propaganda. They could weaponize the truth floor.
The creators of the protocol anticipated this exact threat, which is detailed in the civilian mandate section of our sources.
So they built safeguards.
The system is built with hard-coded, immutable ethical guardrails. And to ensure that no government, corporation, or individual can ever alter those guardrails, the entire SS-138 architecture is anchored to a decentralized blockchain.
The F10 cryptographic anchor.
Yes, every single rule in the protocol, the 0.49 under zero vector floor, the decimation cascade math, and the ethical constraints, is cryptographically hashed and indelibly locked to the Bitcoin blockchain.
And what is the specific hash?
The master root hash specifically begins with F10. It is
Ooh.
F10 E713 other 01 Vandal 58 187 187 WC 6 other 16 LO 386 450 15 fee 15 fee 586 5780 A fee second 3 money 173 B 8 36.
Okay, I have to challenge this premise on behalf of the listeners.
Go ahead.
The source document presents the Bitcoin blockchain as the ultimate untouchable digital padlock. But is it really? What if the blockchain undergoes a hard fork?
It's a valid question.
What if a coalition of state actors pools enough computing power to launch a 51% attack and rewrite the ledger? Is relying on a cryptocurrency network really a foolproof way to secure global physical infrastructure?
The skepticism is highly warranted, and it is a point of contention among security researchers analyzing the blueprints.
What did the creators say?
The authors of this SR-138 framework argue that the computational energy required to successfully rewrite the deep historical blocks of the Bitcoin ledger where the F10 anchor resides is thermodynamically unfeasible, even for a coordinated state actor.
So they are betting on the sheer mathematical mass of the network to protect the code.
They are relying on the decentralized consensus mechanism. The protocol operates using a Merkle tree structure.
What does that mean in practice?
This means every single local node, whether it's running in a pacemaker or a power grid gateway, is constantly cryptographically verifying its own local code against that public F10 master hash on the blockchain.
What happens if it detects a mismatch? Say a government forces a local telecom provider to lower the truth floor to 0.30 so their state-sponsored AI propaganda passes the filter.
If a local node detects that its code has been altered, it registers a structural integrity violation.
Does it send an alert?
No, it doesn't ask for permission to shut down. It executes a fatal state transition error.
Meaning?
It permanently halts all local processing pipelines and places the compromised hardware node into an immutable quarantine registry. It essentially self-destructs the software to protect the broader network from infection.
You cannot bypass the baseline without destroying the node's ability to function.
It's a scorched earth defense mechanism. And part of that locked baseline are the ethical hard codes outlined in the Civilian Governance Charter.
I read through these and they are fascinating. They physically restrict who can even run the software.
The mandate dictates that the technology is strictly dedicated to human preservation, civilian infrastructure, and commercial sectors. The most prominent constraint is the anti-military interlock.
How does software know if it's in a military device?
During the bare metal boot cycle, before the system even loads the main execution layer, it scans the physical hardware it is installed on.
Looking for what?
It looks at the system on a chip architecture. If it detects defense-grade hardware patterns,
Like what kind of pattern?
the highly specific proprietary silicon layouts used for autonomous weapons guidance, drone targeting systems, or classified defense networks. If it sees those, it triggers an instant write block.
It physically refuses to run.
It is mathematically incapable of operating on weapon systems. It is functionally a pacifist protocol.
That is a massive statement for a piece of technology to make. And the second guardrail feels just as culturally relevant right now, the anti-displacement guardrail.
One of the primary societal fears regarding advanced AI and robotics is the mass displacement of human labor.
Blue-collar workers replaced by automated androids.
The creators of SS-138 address this directly at the code level. The assembly instruction set explicitly omits all bipedal motor control loops and humanoid actuation routines.
Meaning you literally cannot use this hyper-fast, hyper-accurate protocol to balance or move a two-legged robot.
It is structurally impossible to use SS-138 to power a humanoid robot designed to walk onto a factory floor and replace a human worker.
Because the code just isn't there.
The code to make it walk simply does not exist in the baseline, and because of the F10 anchor, no one can add it.
It guarantees immunity from military co-optation and actively protects human labor, which clears the path for it to be trusted as a standard for municipal and public use. Which brings us to the real-world impact.
Hey, Hammer.
If this protocol scales, how does it change daily life? Let's look at medical biosensing.
Today, implantable devices like modern pacemakers or insulin pumps often rely on cloud connectivity for complex processing, or they use standard software that drains the battery quickly.
And if you walk into a concrete building and lose your signal, you lose the processing power.
With SS-138's ternary logic and bare metal efficiency, a pacemaker doesn't need the cloud. It can locally flag a physiological anomaly, like an incoming cardiac event, and react in nanoseconds.
It offers extreme battery life and zero dependency on outside networks.
Or consider the smart power grid. As we transition to renewable energy and millions of electric vehicles charging simultaneously, transient voltage surges are a massive threat.
Currently, a sudden surge can confuse the grid's routing AI, causing a cascading failure that blacks out an entire region.
But with the dual-tier hardware interlock, an SS-138 gateway can detect the hallucinated routing command or the physical surge and use those physical GPIO pin drops to isolate the faulted grid segment in 250 nanoseconds.
It traps the failure to a single neighborhood, preventing a multi-billion-dollar utility disaster.
And finally, bringing it all the way back to our starting point, AI models and search engines.
If the 0.49 cosine similarity truth floor is anchored in place across the internet's backbone, the public can finally interact with AI interfaces that are literally incapable of hallucinating facts.
They would return answers that are mathematically validated against empirical root anchors.
Yeah.
They would provide citizens with unassailable tools to verify media, counter deepfakes in real time, and defeat modern digital manipulation.
It replaces the era of probabilistic fabrications with an era of cryptographically anchored truth.
Exactly.
Okay, let's take a breath and recap the incredible ground we've covered today in this deep dive.
It's been a lot.
We started with the inherent dangers of aleatoric and epistemic uncertainty, the fact that standard AI is built to confidently guess when it doesn't know the answer. We looked at the control plane crisis and how traditional operating systems suffer from a latency trap that makes them too slow to stop physical disasters.
We then explored how the SS-138 protocol solves this by stripping away the operating system entirely and living on the bare metal silicon, utilizing a bifurcated dual rail engine that can ingest and audit 50 million packets of data a second without bottlenecking.
We unpack the core logic, the 0.49 to 0 vector truth floor, which abandons binary ones and zeros for ternary logic. It converts AI claims into semantic geometry and measures them against empirical physical baselines, destroying the popularity bias that plagues current models. We walk through the brutal 0.25 microsecond hardware guillotine that physically severs connections to keep infrastructure safe, and how Kubernetes clones the system instantly to maintain uptime.
We touched on how the protocol bridges computer science and information physics, using SAST our 127-stage decimation cascade to achieve room temperature quantum emulation, giving the AI a pure, uncorrupted view of physical reality.
And finally, we saw how every line of this revolutionary architecture is indelibly locked to the blockchain via the F10 anchor, enforcing strict ethical hardcodes that prevent military weaponization and protect human labor. It is an astounding vision for a deterministic, safe future.
It proves that the current trajectory of probabilistic hallucinating AI is not an inevitable endpoint. We possess the mathematical and hardware frameworks to demand absolute precision.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with. A provocative idea to mull over long after you finish listening to this deep dive. If our global digital infrastructure and our personal AI systems eventually adopt strict physics-based truth floors like the 0.49 protocol, what happens to the internet as we know it today? If an AI is structurally and mathematically blocked from outputting or indexing anything that doesn't align with a verified empirical truth baseline, how will that change our relationship with information, with digital art, and with human opinion? Imagine a world where the technology you interact with simply refuses to pass along a lie, a rumor, or a statistically popular fabrication. How much of our daily digital lives, our social media feeds, our endless streams of content would suddenly go completely quiet?
The signal would remain pure and untouched, but the overwhelming noise of the modern era would disappear.
A brand new era of quiet precision. Thank you for taking this complex journey with us today. Keep exploring, keep questioning the systems running the digital world around you, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.
See you on the next deep dive. Right. We'll do one more. Which one shall it be? Let's have a... Let's see. Alright, that's just generating. Let's have another quick look. First to record. Yeah. Remember all these ones. Let's just do a short one.
Imagine if your phone never had to ask a server in the cloud what reality is. Like, no guessing, no data drift, just absolute truth locked right into your device. Today, we're doing that deep dive into a stack of technical papers, structural graphs, and a systems architecture review.
Yeah, we're specifically decoding the SS-138 protocol.
Right, and it's Synthetic Aperture Signal Reconstruction Framework, or SASR for short. So we're basically exploring this radical shift from drifting probabilistic cloud AI to, well, deterministic state locking right at the edge.
So the best way to really understand this shift is to look at where we are right now. I mean, today's centralized cloud AI relies heavily on massive probabilistic models.
Basically, a really sophisticated guessing machine.
Exactly. But the papers we're looking at highlight some huge vulnerabilities there. You've got data drift, man-in-the-middle attacks, systemic noise.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if current cloud AI is like, say, a group of people constantly rewriting a Wikipedia page based entirely on whoever yelled the latest rumor,
Right, which happens a lot.
then the SS138 protocol is doing something completely different with its first to record temporal anchoring.
Yeah, it replaces that probabilistic guess with a hard, immutable fact. It's like carving the very first verified eyewitness account directly into stone.
Oh, wow.
It locks that earliest valid cryptographic log as absolute truth, which permanently binds every state change that comes after it right back to its origin.
But wait, don't standard distributed networks need a binary consensus? Like, usually more than 50% of the nodes have to agree to verify what's true.
Usually, yes.
So if we're relying on a first to record system, how does it deal with the majority just, disagreeing?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the SASR framework bypasses that 50% rule entirely.
Yeah.
It uses this 0.49 majority truth baseline.
0.49 majority truth.
Yeah. Instead of just counting the sheer volume of nodes, SS138 measures entropy weighted information density.
Oh, hold on. Entropy weighted information density. In plain English, what does that actually mean for the data?
So it means the system is evaluating the purity and the directness of the signal. Like if a 0.51 majority is just echoing, lagged, or degraded, or collusive data.
It flags it as noise.
Exactly. High entropy noise. Instead, it measures causal velocity, which is basically how fast and directly a piece of data traveled from its origin.
Right, makes sense.
And it uses that metric to elevate a smaller, unmutated 0.49 minority signal as the definitive ground truth.
Okay, so quality and lineage beat sheer volume. I get that. But let me play devil's advocate for a second. Say the environment undergoes a total system reset, like a complete memory crash. The system wakes back up. How does it know for absolute certain that this tiny minority signal is the actual ground truth and not just, corrupted garbage from the crash?
That is exactly where the protocol's O1 bounded bit mask logic steps in. It's a local, non-binary decision layer.
Okay, so how does it work?
Well, the system knows the truth because it mathematically erases unauthorized vocabulary before the processor is ever even exposed to it. It multiplies the incoming data vectors against a strict mathematical mask.
So think of that bit mask like a physical stencil placed over a chaotic page of text.
Yes, exactly.
It doesn't matter what corrupted gibberish the crash left underneath. You can only see the safe, pre-verified words shining through the holes. Like, anything corrupted by the crash is literally invisible to the system.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. And if the model tries to output tokens outside that defined safe grammar, the bit mask just becomes all zeros.
Which triggers a null intersect detection.
Right. And normally dividing by zero would crash a system entirely.
Yeah, you'd get a massive error.
But instead, this gate triggers a hard-coded state exception. It completely bypasses the floating point unit.
The part that handles complex math.
Yeah, and executes a secure fallback routine. So the ground truth actually survives the reset because the system physically cannot process the corruption.
And honestly, the wildest part of the architecture review for me is the hardware they're doing this on. They simulated this entire framework running flawlessly on an ARM Cortex A72 processor with just 2 gigabytes of RAM.
Yeah, that's just standard low power mobile hardware.
Yeah.
It's really about achieving perimeter sovereignty.
Because it's so lightweight.
Exactly. Because it uses this highly efficient bit mask logic instead of massive consensus processing. It completely severs the dependency on centralized cloud servers. I mean, it runs completely offline.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now?
Well, it points to a future where your technology is truly sovereign. Your devices can operate perfectly, securely, and deterministically without needing a cloud provider to constantly verify reality. We're moving from that constantly rewritten Wikipedia page to an unshakable bedrock of truth right in your pocket.
Which brings up a crazy thought. If a simple localized protocol can mathematically prove a minority truth against a compromised, noisy majority,
Right.
what happens when billions of autonomous edge devices suddenly no longer need the cloud to agree on what reality is?
There we have it. going to say goodnight, guys. Thanks ever so much for turning up for the last two that stayed around. Listen to it back a few times and you'll get to know exactly really how much is in this. Good night, guys. Take care. My love.